We are live. Great. Welcome to the AI argument. That's harder to say than I realized. This is Justin Collery. I'm Frank Prendergast. And we've just been talking about what a crazy time it's been in AI. I
A lot going on
think
this week, Frank.
it's mental. Should we should we start with the big one? Should we start with Elon Musk and his case against OpenAI?
Fascinating. So, for people that may not have seen this news yet, because it only broke this morning, Elon Musk is suing OpenAI, and he's suing OpenAI, saying that it's a breach of contract and a breach of trust. As you might know, OpenAI was set up first. Open, the clue is in the name, to create open source AI software with the goal of creating AGI. And there's really interesting economic incentives for that company. Because as soon as they achieve AGI, they cease to be a company. The company gets wound up, and the software then gets released for the good of humanity. So anybody and everybody can use it. And to my mind, that means that AGI will never be achieved internally. It'll always just be 6 months away because they've got an awful lot of money that they need to pay back to Microsoft. So
I
it's
mean,
very
I
interesting.
wasn't aware. I actually wasn't aware of that. I knew about the create AGI for the good of humanity, but I thought that was like a mission statement. I didn't realize that there was kind of very, very specific measures attached to it when it happens.
Well, now, and that's a good point that you raised there, because this is now going to go to court. And AGI, if I was to bring you back 10 years ago and tell you that, if I was to bring you back 10 years ago and show you ChatGPT 4, and I was to ask you, is that AGI? You'd be like, wow, that is most definitely AGI. But as we get closer and closer to what really is AGI, the goalposts seem to keep moving, and it's getting harder and harder to say, yes, that's AGI, that's AGI. And what we now end up with is, it may well be that a court is going to give us an exact framework of what constitutes AGI. And that'll be very interesting to see what a court sees as AGI and what it doesn't see as AGI.
That will be interesting. And so yeah, so like Elon Musk is saying, GPT-4 is an early version of AGI, and so AGI has been specifically excluded from the Microsoft deal. And so he's saying that this is a major breach of trust and of, well, of, yeah,
Breach of contract.
because, yeah. So do you think GPT-4 is do you think it is an early form of AGI?
I do. I do. I think it's not AGI clearly, but it's an early source of AGI. Sorry now. It's an early source of age, and I think for sure that AGI or something close to AGI has been achieved internally within OpenAI. I think if you look at
You mean
everything that's
potentially like
happened.
apart from GPT-4, something else that's in the basement somewhere?
Yes. I mean, that thing that everybody, I mean, it's a sort of a meme on X and Twitter these days, which is, what did Ilya see? And
Yeah.
I look at what's going on in OpenAI, right? So Ilya, I mean, where is Ilya? We haven't seen him. As far as I know, he's living in a cabin somewhere in a wood hut, somewhere deep in a forest. I mean, nobody knows where he is. There are a number of high profile employees leaving OpenAI almost daily at this point. I see that the rep just today, the rep for developer interaction, again, Adam is his name. He's very active on X. He's left OpenAI just today. We had, what was
Wow.
the name? What was the name of the guy that left last week?
I'm afraid I don't
Andre
remember. Yeah.
Carpathe. Andre Carpathe,
Yeah.
who's a brilliant, by the way. If you're interested in this and you want to learn more about it, go watch his videos on YouTube. They're absolutely incredible.
Do you think
So
there's like do you think there's serious like arguments going on in within OpenAI around this kind of stuff, or do you think everyone just wants to leave to become their own Sam Altman?
I wonder. I don't know, right? Of course, we're
Yeah.
speculating, but I
Yeah.
wonder, is it
But
from certainly from the senior tech people, right? If the goal of the company was to create AGI, and you could see that AGI had either been created already, or the
mm,
path was so clear that it was going to take 6 or 12 months to do it, maybe you're going, well, my work here is done. There's no need for me here anymore. I'm just going to go and enjoy my life, which is what I want to do when AGI comes along, and somewhere between here and next Christmas. and that's going to be a good thing, Frank.
Well, okay, so let's talk about that because that's the other thing about that case is that okay, let me see. I think I pulled out a quote here somewhere. So it says, in the filing or whatever it's called, like it says, Mr. Musk has long recognized that AGI poses a grave threat to humanity, perhaps the greatest existential threat we face today. And then it goes on later to talk about how, those opinions were and possibly are shared by Sam Altman. And there's a quote from Sam Altman saying that the development of superhuman machine intelligence, SMI, probably the greatest threat to the continued existence of humanity. There are other threats that I think are more certain to happen, but are unlikely to destroy every human in the universe the way that SMI could.
Yeah. What are you worried about? The key part of what was said there was there
Mm,
are other things which are certain to happen, but you're
yeah,
worried about something. I mean, what is it that you're worried about? You're clearly in the same camp as Elon Musk. So, what is it that worries you about
I'm.
AI?
I don't know. I'm not going to put myself in a camp with Elon Musk,
I heard you're
but
great buddies.
But I do, yes, I do think that there are risks. Um, and unfortunately, I have no way to assess them. Like, as far as I'm concerned, if I'm not the biggest fan of Elon Musk. I'm not the biggest fan of any of them. But if people like Sam Altman and if the people at the very, very, very forefront of this technology can't agree and aren't sure, but generally speaking, all feel that there is some level of total existential threat, then yes, that worries me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that every technology has some sort of a threat, and I don't think this is any
Every
different. Every
technology.
technology, yeah, every technology. I mean, I think that, when the first motor car was invented, they made guys stand in front of it with the red flag because they were worried about the danger that it posed. Every time you get into an airplane, do you really understand how the airplane works and what the risks are? You
No,
don't,
and that worries me every time I get in an airplane too, but we can
especially a
talk
Boeing.
about that some other time.
Fly Airbus.
Ryan Anderson is here with us and wishing us a happy Friday. So thanks
Hi,
a million,
Ryan.
Ryan. Glad to have you here. Hope you're enjoying this happy Friday chat about existential threats.
Friday wouldn't be complete without considering the end of the world.
You are clearly not at all concerned then. Like, not
No,
at all? At
no,
all.
not at no, not at all. Because I think what we do is we always deal with risks as they happen. So I'm going to give you a good example of how that happens in the world of AI. So one of the risks that you have with AI is around I can clone. In fact, you've cloned your own voice, right? So I can clone Frank Prendergast's voice, and there was this issue where they had cloned. It wasn't Donald Trump's voice. It was it was the other they had cloned
Oh,
anyway politician's voice, and they were doing bot calls. So they were calling
oh
people
yeah,
saying
it was Joe Biden. Was it Joe
Joe
Biden telling
Biden,
people?
correct? Yes. So they cloned Joe Biden's voice, and he was ringing people saying, "Here, listen, don't go out and vote today. We need you to save your vote for the
Yeah,
election come October." Right. So that's clearly a problem, right? And you could imagine that
yeah.
was, to me, that was actually quite a low tech version of what could happen in the future, right? I can totally see that there's risks around that. But the FEC came out, or the SE, they've banned it. It's now become illegal, right? So it's now illegal to do
Right.
that in the future. And that's how regulation works. So you develop the technology, it gets to a certain point. When you see that there's an issue, it's whack-a-mole, and you then ban it. And that's the correct way. And I would put it to you, right, that you can't exactly put your finger on the bad thing that's going to happen before it happens. It's the bogeyman that's under your bed. But I
Yeah.
can certainly point to good things that will absolutely happen as a result of this technology. So this week alone, a research group in the UK have used AI, and they say it's generative AI, to help identify new forms of prostate cancer, which could save, I mean, potentially, hundreds of thousands of people my age and older. and possibly you too, Frank, right?
Yeah,
Right,
yeah,
prostate cancer is a big killer of people like us.
yeah.
So that's a great thing. There was another as well, some open source software. So software that had been generated by OpenAI about 3 or 4 years ago. They had open sourced it, and it was used to help predict the movement in fusion reactors. And it's a new way to control them, which is clean, free energy almost for everybody once it gets developed. So these are absolute certainties, and they are positives which has been given to us by generative AI and AI in general. And when you stack that up against the bogeyman under the bed, and you can't really tell me, what could go wrong, well, then my view is yes, there's risks. I acknowledge that there's risks, and we
Hmm.
deal with them as they come. But there's a whole lot of good stuff, and I want to see the goodies. I want, give me the good stuff
Yeah.
uh, before you go
I mean,
telling me don't do that. I don't like fun police, Frank.
I'm torn. I'm torn because I absolutely agree with you. Like the amazing things that AI makes possible. I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, the two you mentioned are amazing. I've read about things like AI being used to figure out animal communication. So
Yeah,
I mean, just phenomenal stuff. But I hear what you're saying about the way that we handle risk, but I kind of feel like that's a historical way of handling risk for like I think the only thing that I can think of that is in any way kind of relatable to AI would be like something like the Manhattan Project. And I know
yep,
that's used a lot, but like I think most other technologies, the car can only hit one person at a time, or the car can only hit a few people at a time. Um, Whereas AI, the existential threat is that it could potentially just get rid of all of us in a blink, in which case there is no comeback from that. There is no opportunity for us to say, oh, wait, that was a problem. Let's go back.
yeah.
Let's fix that.
And going back to Elon Musk's case, right? It's very interesting because he's in that camp. And so what he's saying is, look, at AGI has been achieved, and therefore the software should be released so that everybody can use it, and it's for the good of humanity. Now, part of me says that if I want to control the risk of AI, having a closed source and having a company like Microsoft and Amazon and OpenAI and Anthropic and these people who can just turn it off at the flick of a switch, I mean, that seems like a fairly good way, certainly at the start of when we're rolling out the technology. I mean, how do you stop? How do you stop a bad guy with AGI, two good guys with bigger and better AGIs, Frank? That's my attitude. So, but in all seriousness, right, having it controlled, having some central
Yeah,
control over it at the start, at least, you can't stop it.
yeah,
It's look at in 3 years, you're going to have an AI that's as capable as GPT-4 on your phone. That is without doubt. That will
yeah.
happen, right? It's baked in. And I do have a concern that when it's so private and so personal, what do people do with it then? Their deepest, darkest thoughts, go into that machine. But for right now, it's controlled centrally. I think the
Hmm.
risks are becoming better understood. And I think it's a cultural shift we have to go through. So I'm okay with that. And there's a lot of cultural stuff going on in this area as well this week.
Yeah. Cultural
So
stuff. What are you
yeah,
alluding to?
well, I think the everything that's happening with Google and the image generation that was going
Oh,
on with
sure.
Google,
Yes.
I mean, that's a fascinating story as well. And that's I think the risks are cultural more than technical, or it's not that AI will wipe us all out in the morning. I don't think that's going to happen. But things can happen with AI where we wipe each other out in the morning, right? That's
Well,
it can
yeah,
cause.
I think it's like you said. I think there are, so I do think there are existential risks, but I don't know at what percentage those risks are presenting. But in the same way that you said that there are very real, tangible benefits right now, there's also very real, tangible issues right now, as you said, kind of at a cultural level. One of them, excuse me, sorry, like one issue being people are pointing out that like a lot of the mainstream media are now blocking AI bots from their content.
Mhm.
But that means that the AIs are being left to gather their information from less reputable sources. And who knows, the impact that that's going to have. with Google, like so they again for anyone who hadn't heard about it, like Google's the image generator within Google Gemini clearly had some kind of prompt, like pre-prompt, that was trying to ensure that its images would be diverse and would be culturally sensitive, etc. But it basically backfired, went completely the other way. And when people were asking for images of, Nazis, it was showing a diverse range of people in Nazi uniforms, which of course is, completely inaccurate. And there was loads of examples of this going on, and they shut it down. They just they removed the ability to create images within Gemini, which you would think sets an interesting precedent. But a friend of mine, Dan Nessel, was interacting with Gemini just with the chatbot, and he asked it about the events of October the 7th with the Hamas terrorist attack, and Gemini said that he was talking about a fictitious event, and that there was no proof, and that it was all made up by the media, and various other claims like that. That was when he was able to get it to talk about it at all. A lot of the time, it just said, "Go and Google it for yourself." But the fact that it said, it's supposed to be able to look things up. It's supposed to be able to talk about current events. It's supposed to have access to the web. And here it's saying something completely outrageous and incorrect.
Yeah.
So, and like, I think this, I don't, obviously we don't know, and this is the big issue, that there's no transparency. They have not shut Gemini down in the same way that they shut the image generator down. They've run into so many issues. I can't see how they could possibly shut it down, because they've run into so many issues. They are just going to be admitting defeat completely if they shut Gemini down. Um, but
I
there's no
the feed,
transparency.
so the feedback I've heard, Frank, on the Gemini model is that it's actually really, really good. Really good. So, and obviously your background is in marketing and it's in, the arts and stuff like that. My background is more technical in nature. And what I'm seeing and reading is people putting entire code bases into Gemini, and then they're using it to, fix bugs and stuff like that. And apparently it is brilliant, as good, if not better than GPT-4. They say that it's an amazing technology. So from a technical point of view, this is really new, right? No
Yeah,
product, no software product ever gets developed and released and is perfect, day one. So it's totally understandable that there will be some issues around it. Now, the concerns that I would have, right, to your point, is what cultural sensitivities are we baking into the models? That's a big question for me. So, and
yeah,
my way of thinking about this is, if we had invented this technology in the 70s, we would have embedded 1970s morals into our AA model. So, everybody would have been called Brad. They would have had a mustache as big as yours, and would have been drinking cans of beer. And, you know, and there would
yeah,
have been sexist, misogynistic AI bots everywhere running the world. And all that's happening now is we're just baking in the current morals into the AIs. And in
yeah,
20 years, everybody looks back at 20 years before or 30 years before and go, oh my God, those people were animals. How could they have thought that? And for sure, 20 or 30
yeah,
years from now, people are going to look at us and go, oh my God, Frank and Justin, they were animals. Look at them. But actually, what we're doing is we're baking that into our AI models. So when I talk
yeah,
about culturally the challenge, I think that is a challenge, and I think what
yeah,
Google did was terrible. Um, I don't think it's any more terrible than the protests where they got statues and started dumping them into rivers. It's a very similar type of mindset that says there was statues in the UK of slave traders and so on, and they were
oh, right,
perceived
right, right, right,
to be
right,
there was statues celebrating people that in today's world should not be celebrated at all, and they would get the statues and throw them into the river, right? Which personally, and these are all personal opinions, but personally I think is totally wrong. If you don't agree with it, stick a plaque up and explain why it was wrong, and then people can see both sides of the story and educate themselves and so on. And something in AI needs to be the same, because what's going to happen
mm,
in the not distant, it's already happening. I've already talked to people, and you might be the same, where instead of using Google to search, this is why it's a Google
Mm.
killer, they now go to GPT and they just ask GPT, well, what's this? And if it gets 80% of the questions right, you're going to trust the 20% of questions that are wrong, and you're going to take that
Yeah.
as truth. And that's an issue. That's absolutely, I would be concerned about that. It's not an existential issue, it's just a factual issue.
No, absolutely. And if, this time, so I don't know, but I suspect that with Gemini, what's going wrong is this, like the way, if you can, so let's take OpenAI.
Hmm.
You can access GPT-4 through the API and get like a pure form. But if you're accessing it through ChatGPT, the developers have like a pre-prompt baked into ChatGPT that gives it a certain kind of way of responding to you and a little bit of extra humanity and things like that. So I'm assuming what's going wrong here is that the pre-prompt in Gemini is completely messed up. Now, I could be wrong. It could be that the actual training is completely messed up, but I suspect that it's this kind of pre-prompt. They got it so wrong this time that it was really obvious.
Yeah,
But as you say, like if they just get it slightly wrong the next time, and it just, let's just talk about like, the left versus right leaning ideologies that we have globally now. Um, if we do end up in a situation where it's mostly closed models of AI and it's Google and it's Meta and it's OpenAI, and then it just becomes like, well, does this one lean slightly left? Does this one lean slightly right? Who's accessing this one? Who's accessing that one? And yeah, it could have big cultural and societal impacts that way.
totally. And it's interesting because this is we can already see this is the intersection of technology and politics, which isn't something that's really happened in the past. And what's interesting about this particular event is that it was really obvious. It was so obvious you could see it with your eyes.
Yeah.
But the question that you would have to ask yourself is, well, what are the more subtle things that are going on in the background? So when I'm doing a search on Google and I get my first top 10 results, how have they been manipulated? Because it's much harder
Yeah.
for me to spot that manipulation. Right? I just take it that the first five results are the first most relevant, but
Yeah.
maybe they've manipulated those results to be, slightly different because of, again, some sort of political agenda. And again, I go back to the point that, if a search result brings you straight to a result to a website, but if I'm getting some text out from an AI
Mm.
model, it can be very hard for me to detect um, how is that? What sort of ideology? Because there shouldn't really be an ideology, but there's ideology in everything. But what ideology has gone to make that? And then we get on to sort of the idea of maybe in the future we need sovereign AIs. So maybe you'll have open AI, but you'll also have Irish AI, you'll have American AI and French AI, because they'll have maybe slightly different takes on what is exactly the
Yeah.
same piece of information.
Yeah. I yeah. I'd be very curious to meet our sovereign Irish AI. I would love to know what it would be like.
Well, I mean, obviously, it's going to be Michael D as our fearless leader. Is going to be the face and voice of our AI. I mean, I can see that it could happen. If you go back to, if you think about France in the 80s, I mean, French in the 80s were incredibly nationalistic. I mean, there was laws passed about, all the language had to be French on the radio. The radios had to play so much French music, and they were very protective of their culture. And again, I go back to this idea of we're baking in the values of today. We're also baking in the culture of today. Um,
Yeah.
and that's an interesting, I mean, even to go back to your thing about, uh, it trolls the internet and it gets, all of this news articles. It also, if you think of, pick a country that maybe doesn't have a big internet presence, they have very little impact on the training data then in the
Mm.
AI. And if you think that this might be the last sort of big technological leap, well, all those cultures get left behind then because they didn't have a big internet presence as the training data was being generated. So again, that's not an existential risk. That's just
Yeah.
something that to be
But
fixed.
it does bring us nicely onto the other topic that we wanted to talk about, because if you're saying, yeah, those countries didn't have a huge internet presence, what might be needed is for uh, a more rounded worldview for AI to be able to gather its own rounded worldview, which it could potentially do through robots who can video and, for all intents and purposes, see and hear what's around them. You could have a bit like Google sends those trucks around videoing for street view. We could have robots wandering the earth, understanding different cultures, different ideologies, and it looks like we might not be quite so far away from that as we thought we were. You sent me a link to one of the latest developments. What was the name? What
Yes.
was the name of
So
the robot?
Figure.ai is the name of the company, and just yesterday, they $275 million was invested into them by uh, OpenAI, Microsoft, and Jeff Bezos. Were the leaders of that, um, and that's. I mean, Frank, I don't know what you're worried about in this one. AI controlling robots, nothing could possibly go wrong. It'll be totally fine. Don't worry about it. But so just to, I mean, talk a little bit about the technicality of it. So if you look at Tesla and full self-driving cars, the reason that they have a competitive advantage today and are likely to maintain their competitive advantage into the future is because they have an enormous amount of vehicles on the roads every single day, and they're collecting massive amounts of data. And for their latest full self driving release, all they did was they wrote no software for that latest release of full self driving. All they did was they played the AIs, the videos of people driving their cars, and that's how it learned how to drive. Right? That's how they did it. So you
That
can
is
imagine.
mind blowing.
Yes, and I find it brilliant. I'm actually really impressed with the companies that Musk creates. You know, when you see that type of technical brilliance behind it, it's fantastic. So from an OpenAI point of view, right, as you correctly pointed out, right, that at the moment they trawl the internet and they download as much data as they can. But if you have teams of robots out in the world and those robots are listening and they're seeing and they're touching and they're interacting, the amount of data that generates is enormous. And in fact,
Yeah.
Jan LeCun, and I've totally mispronounced his name, but he's the head of AI for Meta, often talks about the fact that the amount of data that a 5-year-old child receives is far more than the amount of data that we currently use to train our AI models. And the reason for that is basically audio and visual information
Mm.
that the child's, all these things that the child is picking up almost subconsciously. And I don't know, do you find that concerning, Frank, that we're going to have robots folding your laundry?
Well, I mean, I would love to have robots to do various tasks around the house that I have no interest in doing. Like I've got a huge house clean in front of me this weekend, and if I could have a robot do it, I would be absolutely thrilled. But as you've pointed out, we have seen too many films about how this turns out not to have any worries whatsoever. And I mean, so the video of the video that went along with that announcement was of a man walking up to that robot that is standing behind a counter with a kind of one of those Keurig coffee makers in front of it. And the man simply walks up to the counter and says, "Make me a coffee." And the robot has, with perfect dexterity, takes out one of those tiny little pods and puts it in the machine. Like, you know, we all know how finicky those Keurig machines are. And this robot does it absolutely perfectly just on a voice command. And I think it said in the post that like it wasn't like specifically trained to make coffee, if I understood correctly. It's like,
They what they do for a lot of these, and there's a lot of companies working on this, by the way. They are by no means the only company doing this, but what a lot of them are doing, they learn by example. So what they will do is they will film somebody doing a particular action or completing a particular task, and then the robot will copy that afterwards. And then because you're
phenomenal.
using generative AI, obviously it's not like an old computer program where if it moves slightly this way or that way, it won't get it in. Like I think you've seen maybe some of the videos where it takes 2 or 3 goes for it to get the pod into the coffee pod machine, but it
Right.
sticks at it and it actually does it. So it's incredible. But I will say, I'll give you the reason why I'm not worried about this, Frank, maybe to help you sleep better over the weekend, um, is that, AIs don't have intent, right? They don't have anything
Yet.
except for what we ask them to do. So,
Yet.
well, there's nothing yet, okay? And if they develop intent, well, then we'll deal with it. But right now, they don't have intent, right? All they do is they do what you ask them to do.
Yeah, but okay, so there's the yet question in terms of, people, we're striving for AGI. Elon Musk thinks we're there already, and that this is a financial con by OpenAI that they're not admitting it. Um, and the next step up from AGI is, this super intelligence,
It'll happen the
and
next day.
yeah. So, and wait, you think it'll happen in the next decade, and you're still not worried? Like, you're still saying that no, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. The robots just do what we ask them to, but not if they have super intelligence. But
And
also, super intelligence aside, I mean, humans make loads of mistakes. Could we not just end up like with some bad programming that has disastrous effects? Could we not accidentally program the robot to do the opposite of what we tell it to, and then we tell it not to kill anybody? You know?
we could, and we'll deal with it when that happens. I mean, we look at I work in the
Ah!
software. I work in the software industry. Mistakes happen all the time. I mean, you don't want to know. You don't want to know how the sausage is made, Frank. And the less you know about the software that controls your life, probably the better you'll sleep at night.
Yeah, I'm sure, I'm sure in software, generally speaking, the issues that are being resolved are not, oh dear, it wiped out half of the team.
It might feel like that to some poor, long-suffering software engineers.
And then I guess, well, we're actually at time, but let's just finish on this one last point because it does kind of tie in. Because I remember last year seeing it was a construction site, and those tarps that they put down over the building while they're working on it, and the tarp said, "Hey, ChatGPT, finish this building." And then underneath that, it said something like, "Your skills are irreplaceable," and it was, but a massive ad for the construction company doing the building. And I saw it, and I was like, have they not heard about Boston Dynamics and the incredible robots that they have already built, and are just waiting for AI to be put into them? And so one of the other topics that we were going to talk about today was the company who have, I've forgotten the name, begins with K, replaced like 700 jobs with AI in customer support.
The company's name was Klarna. Um,
Klarna, yes.
Klarna was the company that came back, and what they've done is they've released, they've basically, yeah, got rid of 700 support staff, and replaced them with AI. And again, right, I would point, and I know we're at time, and we'll come back to this, but those were 700 jobs that weren't good for people, right? I mean, this is like getting rid of 700 coal mining jobs, right? It's bad for
Yeah,
their mental health, bad for their physical health, and there's a huge customer surplus because you get faster, better customer service. So I think
yeah.
this is a total net win. Although I can see that people
Or
might say, "Oh, we're losing 700 jobs." We're not. It's everybody
no, but
wins.
no, but and this is why I tied it into the robots, because it's 700 jobs right now because Klarna acted, in my opinion, probably maybe a little bit too quickly.
They're
But they
brave.
acted quickly, so it's 700 jobs. It's making the headlines, but like these are not going to be the only 700 jobs affected or lost, and that's at something like customer support right now, where AI can right now quite easily do it. But now we're looking at putting AI into robots. The construction company that thought it was perfectly safe last year is no longer looking very safe. Those 700 jobs, like, that's going to be a domino effect, and it's going to be across how many industries, how many skill sets, how many levels. And the question then becomes like, what do those people do? And not what do they do, because as far as I'm concerned, AI can have my job. AI can, I'd be delighted, take it, lovely. But how do I pay my rent, and how do I pay for my groceries? So maybe that's a question we'll come back to the next time we meet
Maybe we
up.
will. I'll just finish and say that I think I hear your concern. But I think I sort of I think of this period as kind of the difficult teenage years. So society has to go through this transition, and I think the end state is good, and I think the start state where we are now is good, but the bit in the middle is going to be challenging. And it's 700
Mm.
jobs in a call center that have been lost today, but tomorrow it's going to be 700 programming jobs, and they're going to be well-paid jobs, and that's when it's really going to start hitting the headlines. And maybe that process needs to be managed, and we need to think about it. And we should have a chat about how you might do that some other time.
Sounds good. Amazing. Brilliant. This has been a pleasure, and terrifying and fascinating. And
Frank, hopefully you sleep a little bit better this weekend.
I don't think so, Justin. I think we've gone the other way.
Great.
Brilliant. I will chat to you again next week.
Talk to you next week.
Cheers.